Good afternoon, everybody. We've had some terrific presentations prior to mine, a lot of really interesting numbers. I'm going to talk about the really exciting stuff now, the laws. The laws that have been proposed over the years, and the laws that are on the horizon, which we'll get to some of the points we've heard about earlier, about how do you create the market conditions and a legal framework that will enable electric vehicles to compete. Because right now, it's really not a level playing field when you stack up all the subsidies that apply to fossil fuels and ethanol and other biofuels. Right now, it's not a fair fight. So what I'm going to do is talk about some of the federal legislation that's on the horizon and talk about some of the work that I've done with a coalition of companies called the Battery Electric Vehicle Coalition. So this is the framework of my talk today. You know, it's funny, when you go back in time, you realize that we've been here before. Many of you probably know that back in the 1970s, after the first Arab oil embargo, we had a groundswell of political support for legislation that would create incentives for electric vehicles. And in 1976, Congress passed the Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Act, which actually was vetoed by President Ford. And they went back and they, by two-thirds majority, overcame the veto. So there was a groundswell of political support for this law. And it basically was to create a national policy to accelerate the development and implementation of electric vehicles. What happened? Well, we all know that electric vehicles did not take off. There were, let me just go, let me go back on this. Okay. There were 50 congressional hearings since 1976 to look at more laws and legislation to try to create a market for electric vehicles. And that's just a few of the hearings. 79, we had hearings on storage batteries, electric vehicle applications. 1990, we had hearings on electric vehicle technology and commercialization. So this is a continuing theme that we've seen over the years. And even today, we have 87 bills that have been proposed in Congress to try to create market conditions for electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. I'm going to talk a little bit in detail about two at the bottom. The Promoting Natural Gas and Electric Vehicles Act, which some of you may have heard of. It's the EV Communities Deployment Act that the Electrification Coalition has proposed. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Senator Stabenow's bill, the Charging America Forward Act, which has some interesting provisions in it. So there's a group of companies called the Electrification Coalition, which is a spin-off from an organization in Washington, D.C. called Securing America's Future Energy, which has proposed to sort of break the chicken and egg barrier that has really bedeviled the deployment of electric vehicles in the past, and that is the difficulty in not having infrastructure out there in the communities to refuel these vehicles, and not and so consumers having uncertainty in their minds when they go to buy a car. Well, am I going to be able to refuel this car? Am I going to have access to fuel? And that's been a problem with ethanol. It's been a problem with virtually all alternative fuels, hydrogen, obviously, and electric vehicles as well. You know, we have an incredibly extensive network of fossil fuel refueling stations across the country. But to try to get a new type of technology, you need to build out that infrastructure. So the Promoting Natural Gas and Electric Vehicles Act of 2010, which has a chance of being taken up in the lame duck session of Congress because Senator Reid, the majority leader in the Senate, has said that that's going to be on the calendar. This would create a EV communities type program where communities such as your own here in Rhode Island would band together to develop their own deployment plans that would enable the type of market conditions that would allow electric vehicles to flourish. And the program will be managed by the Department of Energy. They're going to dedicate $400 million in the first phase of this program to do things like charger deployment, deploy the infrastructure in the public domain so that people don't have range anxiety, updating building codes and parking and permitting so that people can have access to infrastructure quickly, and new buildings are designed to accommodate charging infrastructure. Workforce training of electricians and other folks in the trades that are going to be key constituents here. And then fleet conversions for EVs, and then finally utility upgrades. So this new approach has a lot of merit because money will be funneled to targeted communities that compete, and so it's the theory behind it is if you can get a critical mass, a beachhead of vehicles in one locale, then eventually that will grow outward to other areas. You'll have linkages between communities. You'll have corridors where you'll have charging along the corridors. And so it's kind of a new approach to trying to overcome this chicken and egg dilemma. And so under this bill, we would have consumer rebates for EVs. There would be reductions in sales taxes. These are the types of things that local communities would look to do in order to create the market conditions for electric vehicles. And here are some of the criteria. So what I would suggest is we have a very good framework here already. We have lots of interested people. I'm sure people came from all over New England. This region, I grew up in New England, but I live in Philadelphia now. But from what I can tell, this region really is blessed with lots of natural attributes which would position it very well to compete in this EV communities program, which is probably going to come to pass in the next year or so. And that is because you're blessed with low carbon electricity. You also have an abundance of potential wind resources with offshore wind power development. And one of the things that you mentioned about the NRDC EPRI study, one of the interesting conclusions about that study was that having large populations of electric vehicles actually speeds the penetration of wind power because of the coincidence of the generation at night from wind power and having a load readily available to take that power. So I think that this area is very well positioned to be a deployment community, and it's great that you're having this conference right now because it's an opportunity to start to build the networks and the relationships that will go into preparing the competitive application. These are some of the critical aspects of the plan. You need to have substantial partnerships among all the stakeholders, elected officials, the utilities, the PUCs, the DOTs, those property owners that are going to host the infrastructure, and then finally the manufacturers and the dealers. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Battery Electric Vehicle Coalition. These are the members of the coalition that are working on the do is to focus on the battery and try to come up with some very targeted policy initiatives that would reduce the incremental cost of batteries. And so we've come up with a federal warranty support program as well as tax credits for redeployment of used batteries so that once a battery has gone through its useful life in a vehicle, which is considered generally to be 80% state of charge, those batteries can be redeployed in stationary applications. And those who do that, for whether it's renewables firming or backup power or grid support, those who do that can get a tax credit. And that's one of the legislative proposals that Senator Stabenow has in her bill. And then the second aspect that we see as very key is the charging infrastructure tax credit, which right now is set to expire at the end of this year. It's right now set at 50%, and that was passed 2 years ago. So anyone who deploys a charger in their home right now or in the public domain, the owner of that property gets a 50% investment tax credit. And so we think it's very critical to extend that tax credit out on a long-term basis so that there's market certainty and people can plan for deployment. The warranty support program I'll just talk about very briefly. The notion is that these electric vehicle batteries, although the technology really is fantastic and there's lots of lab data, it's still somewhat uncertain as to how they will perform in a very demanding field out in the real world where you have vibration and temperature extremes and moisture and all the things that can interfere with the battery. Because of the cost of the battery and the fact that OEMs have to warrant those batteries to a level that is comparable to an internal combustion engine, there's natural hesitance to produce huge volumes. General Motors is doing 10,000 units the first year of the Volt. That's a lot of cars, but it's very, very low in terms of what a normal new model would be, which would probably be 50, 100,000 or more units. So this warranty support program would be the notion of a portion of the risk of a battery failure would be picked up by the federal government, and it would be through the Clean Energy Deployment Administration, which is a new tool that's been proposed in the energy bill to try to speed the penetration of new technologies. I'm rushing through this because I'm running out of time, but my presentation will be available so you can look at it, and if you have any questions, feel free to call me. The last thing is this notion of creating the market conditions for redeployment of used electric vehicle batteries. We are going to have a supply of electric vehicle batteries that come out of these cars because undoubtedly there will be some that don't last the 8 years that are being warranted. And when a battery gets down to 80% state of charge, the consumer's going to want to change it out because you're going to be getting reduced range and things like that. So this program that is in Senator Stabenow's Charging America Forward Act bill would create tax credits for utilities to recondition these batteries and redeploy them in stationary applications, and thereby create a kind of secondary market for batteries that many people think is very promising to try to reduce the cost of the vehicles up front. Thanks for your time.